It's my great pleasure to introduce Leigh Alexander. I met Leigh at the very first practice conference in 2011, where she was handily demonstrating her superhuman ability to summarize, synthesize, and develop unique insights about talks in real time. I'm sure that many others in the room can recall the uncanny feeling of leaving the stage to find a thoughtfully written article posted under Leigh's byline before you've even sat down. There's no one I trust more representing my work. In an industry plagued by burnout and turnover, Leigh has been a steady fixture. She's currently the editor-in-chief of Offworld, a revived outlet that showcases writing and work from women and others marginalized within the games industry. She's a former editor-at-large at Gamasutra and has contributed to Time, Rock Paper Shotgun, The Atlantic, Edge, Vice, and Kotaku, among many others. She's also written Clipping Through, a book exploring her experiences within the games industry through the lens of a week spent at the Game Developers Conference. Beyond her prolific and impactful career within media criticism, she's written a vivid personal memoir, Breathing Machine, about her early experiences with computer games, and her video project, Lo-Fi Let's Plays, revisited a number of those Apple II adventure games in real time. Leigh is also a gifted performer and has shared her vocal talents through recording her own audiobooks, as well as a deeply chilled out, smooth jazz scored GTA review entitled This Is Why We Video Gaming. We are so lucky to have her here with us, sharing her closing response to Practice 2015.
Thank you guys so much. It is amazing to be here. This is my favorite event, and it's incredible. It's an honor to be asked to speak here, and humbling. I genuinely believe that Practice is, it's consistently the forefront venue for discourse on the soul of our medium. And as a person who's not really a game developer, conversation is all I make. And this is the place where I feel most relieved and validated. Of course, there have been some amazing talks this week, and so I came here to sort of crystallize this forefront thinking and kind of tie it all together for you, and talk about some of the major questions and issues that are surrounding the practice of design. So, one of the biggest things I believe is on our mind right now is art. Are video games an art? What does the word art mean? Has anyone ever thought, anyone ever thought about this before? How do we know when a game is art? If art is interactive, then who is the artist? The player or the developer? Another modern concern affecting discourse in our space right now is narrative. What is the role of story in a game? Do games need a story? Do they need stories at all? Should the developer, is the developer an auteur who's crafting a story? Or do we let the player tell his own story in the emergent universe? How do we make the storytelling more immersive? What does the word immersion mean? How can we give the player the opportunity to express their agency in the world? How can we make sure that all the choices that we give them within the narrative are meaningful? Meaningful. Let's talk about words. What do you guys think of the word gameplay? How about mechanic? What's a mechanic? Maybe we should use different words. Maybe I like to call it game mechanic, but maybe we should be calling it like fun place or expressive interaction. What does fun mean? How do we know when the player's having fun? Should fun be the goal for games, or should difficulty? So, did I worry you anybody for a second there? So, obviously, some of your bile has crawled halfway up your throat by this point. Obviously, those are conversations that we have already had, and the questions that we are often asked and asking, and we have circumlocuted those things so many times that it's frustrating. And the conclusion that we come to when we have conversations like that is that the answers don't matter, or that to continue to pursue the answers to questions in that way no longer serves us. And in some cases, it's ultimately misleading, disables our critical lens and our vocabulary. That, for me, is one of the things that's most gratifying about practice. It is designed, in the literal sense of the word, to create productive discourse. When Frank and Eric kicked off the event, Frank put it very simply: we like to talk here and talk productively. So I started this talk in the manner that I did because I thought it would stress you out a little bit and therefore articulate to you the difference between the kind of dialogue we have here and the kind of dialogue that takes place elsewhere, especially for me as a games critic. Those are always going to be new conversations to someone that I meet every day. You here are exceptional. That is the bad news. The way that I define my work personally as a games critic is that I've endeavored to, I guess, be an ambassador of our vocabulary. Like I personally, there's all different ways to do the job. I personally could give a fuck about informing the consumer or catering for the things that the traditional audience cares about. I want to find ways to take the values and understanding and abiding love for craft that we have in this room and convey some small aspect of it to the audience, or maybe to other game developers even. My goal is to have your players tell me that I have helped them think about your work in new ways. This is often a heartbreaking Sisyphean task. Sometimes I even incur threats to my person for doing it, which is so ridiculous when you think about that sometimes a void opens up in me where no hope is allowed. I didn't even really want to tweet about being here because I want these people knowing where I am. I don't even want to hear them talking about me. So while we, as design minds and critics and thinkers and lovers of this medium, we're moving forward with this passion and curiosity, but sometimes taking that outside of this room is like dragging a beast by the tail, and I'm not a person with a lot of upper body strength. So a lot of folks that I have spoken to this weekend there's a couple themes that seem to have emerged from this event, and one of them is unfairness. It was kicked off so beautifully by Meg Giant on Friday night and continued through many of the other talks. The idea that perhaps the most interesting thing designers can do right now is not to give that gamer what he wants and expects, and that in fact people can learn and change, in meaningful ways from having their fantasies thwarted. I think it's wonderful that this undercurrent is emerging, even among people who are not overtly interested in being political or doing it intentionally or solely, that we are looking at ways, we're thinking about ways to balance power. That's what you're doing, a lot of you have done that in your work this weekend. And so in some sense, perhaps the things that you are working on and will work on will speak for me, even during the times that I struggle to speak for you. So the thing that's important to me right now is I want this to stick. I do not want the conversations that we've had this weekend about balance and justice to become like the conversations about narrative choices or whatever. And honestly, I get a little bit worried about it sticking because one of the biggest problems that our field has is a profoundly and cripplingly short memory. So here's a weird story. I recently bought this book it was made in like 1994, called Surfing on the Internet. I'm a huge 90s fan. I love internet frontier stories in particular. And this is a memoir written, again, probably around 94, by a woman called J.C. Hers, and it's about her time on newsgroups back in the day, which is cool because, as Matt said, I wrote a memoir about being on newsgroups. I did that a couple years ago. Neat. So I Google her, and it turns out in 2001, 2002, she actually wrote game criticism in the New York Times. And as I'm reading her articles, I was a little bit surprised. And they were more sophisticated than I would expect old games criticism to be as well. And I'm like, we're always complaining that the mainstream media never acknowledges us. The idea that, we are getting games into, traditional publications. We're still like, yeah, we just did that. But no, a woman was writing games criticism in the New York Times in 2001. And then I found out she also wrote about a book about video games, and she had a consulting firm, which I also have. And the weirdest thing of all is that this is what she looks like. Right? And I had never even heard of her. How does that happen? That's weird. That should not have come as a surprise to me. So now I bring her up a lot, and I ask people about her work, and occasionally people in games do know, they've read her book Joystick Nation or something, but they don't know her in any great depth. This kind of scares me, because if I were to change careers right now, how soon would I be forgotten? In 5 years, is someone going to be doing my work all over again and acting like it's new? Everything that I care and I talk about that I think is important, how long until it gets swallowed into the sea? So that's a vain concern of mine, that people would never forget and remember and praise me. But it applies to you too. How do we make sure that the things that we learn and explore and decide in this room become permanent? They're not things that we have to consistently re-unearth and re-explain. How do we take everything that and create a long-term narrative of knowledge for the game industry? even in my most cynical times, I know that progress is happening in our field. Our work is becoming more sophisticated and more diverse and transgressive and permissive and creative. But that is happening directly in step with a distinct and significant non-commercial trend in our field. Like 5 years ago, being an indie means you can make money without a publisher. Now indie, everyone laughs already. That was 5 years ago, only 5 years ago. Indie now means you make games because it is an inherently valid thing to do, even at the expense of commercial opportunity. It is an inherently valid mode of self-expression and not necessarily a product that you are manufacturing. I was speaking to Naomi this weekend about how some of the game makers being taught in her classes are people who make a few $100 a month on Patreon. Like, people being taught at leading universities, their work is being taught in leading universities. They're not, commercially successful people, which is great. I have the luxury to say it's great because I am not the person who spends time and sometimes money to make something. I'm just the person who gets to point at it when it's done and go, valid, But it also means that the way that we, so the significant non-commercial trend does mean that the way we are going to reach people with our values and ideas becomes less clear. And maybe that is okay. One question I never stop being interested in is whether influencing the mainstream even a little bit is an achievable or desirable goal. I'm not here to obligate anybody to do that. But I know that I have one thing in common with the conventional gamer, and that is that I'm afraid of losing. I'm afraid of losing things. So what I'm about to say is not for social media, please. I believe that I will be finished working in games writing, games criticism within the next 6 months. I think I've done all I can for games, and perhaps more importantly, they've done all they can for me. I'm not making a grand exit or anything. I'll probably still write articles when I want to, but I'm feeling finished with this. The world is full of the kind of games that I wanted. And there will be multitudes more of the kind of games that I want. When I began, there were barely any. I learned the means to describe why I loved the games I did for the express purpose of requisitioning more of them. I believe that conversation is a design tool. I believe that vocabulary is what makes games better. And I wanted to play a part in helping to create a world where the things I loved would be more possible, which is, that's what we're all doing. I think we're on the way to that world, despite everything and despite all the shit that's gone on that I've been through, that I and others have been through. I think, at least in our field, our little corner of the world, we have a shot at making that happen. I do not want the stone to slide back down the hill. I do not want the words said in this room this weekend about how you plan to treat your players and how you plan to entreat them, about how you plan to teach them more about storytelling and fairness. I don't want that to be washed away and forgotten. Or worse, for someone to show up in 5 years and say it's like it's new and get all of your credit. So this was sort of, I was asked to kind of do a roundup type thing, give takeaways for the event, but I'm convinced you do not need me to give you takeaways because there's been an amazing social media repository around practice. We're constantly talking to each other about what we've learned here. You know what the takeaways are. I'm really excited that there's a lot more narrative games, a lot more story-oriented games and interactive fiction. That makes me personally happy. But what I want to say is don't let that be lost. Design a solution to the memory problem that our field has, because now a lot has been sacrificed for the progress that we've made. And it, obviously, I forgot about someone like J.C. Hers is, a vanity issue, but forgetting about the progress that we've made spiritually in our work would be tragic. Design a solution that will create permanence for the work that you have done this weekend and onward, because I want so much, to have a world where this isn't the only place I can go where I feel like everybody fucking gets it. And I want to thank you so much for your work, and especially to Eric and Frank for your ineffable energy and your curiosity, and your dedication to conversation, for making conversation a joyful place for me to work, just because I don't get that opportunity that much. So, wow, sorry everybody. I've had an amazing time. I hope you've all had an amazing time. Thank you for listening to me onward into the new year.